Okay, Chair, we're now live.
Thank you very much and good evening and welcome to this virtual Cabinet meeting that's being conducted with members and officers at various locations, communicating via audio, video and online. There is also the opportunity for the public and press to listen and view proceedings, and welcome to our speakers this evening. I'll explain later on. Before the meeting starts, I would like to invite the committee member and scrutiny manager to explain how proceedings will work and to confirm that members and officers are in attendance.
Thank you, Chair. When I call your name, can you please indicate your attendance to confirm that required members, officers and members of the public are present and can hear and be heard. Councillor Albert?
Yep.
Councillor Billing?
I indicate my attendance.
Thank you. Councillor Clark?
Here.
Councillor Dennis Harburg?
Here.
Councillor Grindle?
Yep.
Councillor Hoskins?
Yep, present.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis?
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Steers Hanscom?
Yes, I'm here.
We have Deputy Executive Members, Councillor Ian Mantle.
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Ruth Brown.
Present.
Thank you. We have officers, Anthony Roche.
Yep, present.
Ian Cooper.
Yes, here.
Vaughan Watson.
Here.
Steve Crowley.
Yes, here.
Isabel Alajules.
Present.
Chris Robson.
Present.
Ruben Ayavu.
Present.
Nigel Smith.
Present.
Louise Symes.
Present.
Chloe Gray.
Present.
Ian Fullstone.
Present.
We have William Edwards doing the IT for us, and myself, Hilary Deneen. We have 3 members of the public. Margaret Edelston.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. John Webb.
Here.
Thank you. And Roger Lovegrove.
Hillary, Mr. Chairman, sorry for
Yes.
butting. I'm about to log in from another machine, so I'm going to leave one and come in on the other, if you'd be so kind.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Lovegrove? Okay. I'm sure he's here. We'll catch up with him in a bit. Extracts from the remote and partly remote meetings protocol are included with the agenda, and the full version is available on the Council's website, which includes information regarding live streaming, noise interference, rules of debate, voting and Part 2 items. Members are requested to ensure that they are familiar with the protocol. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? No, in that case, I will hand over to the Chair, Councillor Martin Steers.
Thank you very much, Hilary. First of all, apologies for absence. We've had apologies from Deputy Carol Stanier, Councillor Carol Stanier. Are there any other apologies? Okay, then item 3 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of January. I'd like to propose that we take as read and approve as a true record the minutes of that meeting. Can I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second those, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Paul. I'm jumping around. If there are no comments, then we move to the vote.
Those in favour of accepting the minutes could press their blue hand now, please.
Thank you very
That's
much.
fine.
That is clearly carried.
My hand is yellow, I have to say.
Oh, it looks blue to me.
That's yellow on my screen, sorry.
Okay, I then authorise the committee member and scrutiny manager to apply my electronic signature and initials to the approved minutes. Item 4 is notification of other business. There is none. Item 5, my announcements. First of all, in accordance with council policy, this meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recordings will be available to view on mod.gov and the film recording via the NHDC YouTube channel. Members are reminded that this council has declared a climate emergency. This is a serious decision and means that as this is an emergency, all of us, officers and members, have that in mind as we carry out our various roles and tasks for the benefit of our district. There are more details on the agenda front sheet. And in addition, of course, we have an item this evening very much relevant to that. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. And then finally, I will be taking items 20 and 21 immediately prior to item 19. Public participation. We have 3 members of the public here. We very much welcome. Margaret Eddleston will speak regarding Hitchin Bridge Club, and John Webb and Roger Lovegrove regarding local plan implementation. And we will take those presentations before the relevant item. So then item 7 is items referred from other committees, and there is a long list of these. Item 7A, referral from Cabinet Panel on the environment. We'll be taking that with item 9. Item 7B, referral from Hitchin Committee. Hitchin Bridge Club, we'll take that with item 8. 7C, referral from Hitchin Committee, and one that we're going to deal with straight away, ward matters and outside organisations, community space. And Councillor Elbert to present.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, colleagues. This is an item that we discussed at the Hitchin Committee, and as I mentioned probably later on as well, one of the themes of the Hitchin Committee last time was about space, accommodation space for outside organisations, and indeed obviously using some of the existing space, like in Charnwood. We had presentations from the Charnwood Association, from Citizens Advice, from the Hitchin Bridge Club that we'll come to later on, and obviously this item from Hitchin Band. And obviously, I would particularly like to thank those who came from Hitchin Band, and in particular Keith Birch, who did the main presentation. I think what we all know about Hitchin Band, it's a hugely successful organisation. It's been going a very long time, but what they are in desperate need for is accommodation. They've been using a room at the rugby club, but what they really need is something rather more bespoke, and obviously things that they can actually is more suited to their needs. They say they've been based at Hitchin Rugby Club for I think 13 years now, but I think clearly as the needs of the rugby club change, I think the needs also of Hitchin Band are changing. So I think one of the key messages that I'd really like to bring to Cabinet this evening is the those recommendations that are on sort of page 2 of this item, which is, I think, how we can asking Cabinet to consider how we can manage and look for community space in Hitchin for a number of organisations. And I've mentioned the Band, Citizens Advice, the Bridge Club, and so on, which is an agenda item later. But also would like to ask that we actually formally ask and agree that officers sit down and engage with these groups in order to see what we might be able to do in Hitchin. That there are a number of potential options, and we also begun to look at the places, the public buildings around the town, whether they are less so perhaps now the council ones, but the Herts County Council, the police, and others have all got buildings, and there is a number of potential spaces that might become available in Hitchin. And I think we would really like officers to engage with some of the local community groups, particularly Hitchin Band, to see what we might be able to do and look for future options. So that's what the Hitchin Committee is asking Cabinet to take forward, and I hope that colleagues will be prepared to pick that up and ask for officers to do that piece of work in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Judy.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd obviously like to lend my support to what the Chair of Hitchin Committee is proposing. It seems a very, very long time to me ago that we were having these debates at the time of the demolition of Bancroft Hall, And there were groups in Hitchin who were so desperate for spaces to do stuff that they even thought it might be a good idea to keep Bancroft Hall. And if anybody can remember what a dreadful state it was in at the time, that really did show a level and a measure of desperation. But we don't seem in some ways to be any further forward. The council at that point did a study on social space, leisure space, and concluded that there was plenty of it, and that somehow the local organisations just weren't being bright enough at finding the right bits. But clearly this was not the case, because there may on paper have been enough actual spaces for enough actual bodies, but they weren't ever quite right for the groups that needed to use them. And I think we have to take this opportunity now of trying to put some sort of jigsaw puzzle together that enables the local groups not to have nirvana, not to have perfection in everything they want. We can't have every local group having its own separate building somewhere, but we can find imaginative ways of matching up the needs of some of these groups, and we need officers to take this very seriously and go away and do a piece of very specific work on it. So I fully support.
Yes, thank you, Judy. I should have first of all asked for a seconder, and I'm happy to second the recommendations. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chair. I would say, obviously, I'll agree with everything that Judy and Ian have said. But I think it's important as well for us to bear in mind that we do need a community hub like this. People might say, well, there's the town hall, but actually that's not necessarily suitable for all of the uses of these different groups. And there are so many different groups that are crying out for new homes. And having a community, some sort of community hub where you've got music space, where you've got that point of face-to-face contact for consumer advice and support services like the CAB, and the Bridge Club can have their space as well, doesn't just benefit Hitchin. We know that each of these organisations actually benefit the entire district and beyond that. So I think that this is absolutely something that is worthwhile as investing the resource in terms of officers, the time, the costs, etc., to make it work. And thinking creatively, I can think back to my childhood. The Doncaster Music Service was homeless. Then there was a middle school that had vacant space, and they took over some of those classroom spaces and were able to use that facility. So councils can do these things, and it does work, and it delivers real community benefit, not just to one town, but absolutely across the board. And I think if we can, we've got to find a way to make this work.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. Paul.
Thank you, Martin. I mean, I'm going to support what's been said by the previous three speakers, but I just want to make the point that it is not just these two organisations, it is any organisation, which I know, you know, the people are talking about, and we need to support them. And it's not just Hitchin organisations, it's organisations across the district, whether they're in rural areas, Letchworth, Baldock or Royston. You know, we are talking about, you know, facilities for all. There is only a limited amount of space, which is one of the issues, but we've got to do what we are able to do. In the past, the council has had a equation for the amount of public space per head, which has always confused me, because I don't think it's sufficient, you know, and perhaps that's something that going forward we could look at to put in place. But I fully support what Councillor Albert has moved. As I am a member of the Hitchin Committee, that is not surprising. So I fully endorse the comments made by my previous colleagues.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I think that's all our speakers. So if there's no other speakers, can we ready to move to a vote? If you'd like to raise your hands if you're in favour. That is clearly carried. Thank you. So we move on then to item 7D, referral from Hitchin Committee, ward matters and related to parking tariffs. We'll take that with item 16. Then we have referral from Finance, Audit and Risk, the risk management update, and welcome Councillor Kate Aspinwall to present that item.
Hello, Martin. Thank you for having me. As ever, I've got a load of things to present to you, so bear with me while I manage all these and different papers on different devices. So the first thing then that the Finance Audit and Risk Committee would like to recommend to Cabinet is regarding our risk management update. And this we met last week as a committee, and this was probably where we had the most involved conversation with regard to what would like to bring here. With regard to the risk, then there are several items there that you can see have been recommended to you. We were really satisfied with the way that the risk matrix has been proposed, and that there be no change to the risk score for corporate planning risks. Subject to one note there within the risk update that we had, it did talk about speculative expansion of London Luton Airport to 4 runways, which as we progressed through that conversation, it became quite evident that that was many, many years old as a proposal. We did, as a committee, ask that it just be looked into. It has been looked into since then, and I am satisfied that that is no longer relevant, and so that piece can come off of there. And so the recommendation is that there be no change there. There is an increase in the risk score from 5 to 7 and a target risk score of 6 for the increased homelessness. This is obviously as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and all of the work that's been happening in the last 12 months. We all agreed as a committee that was an appropriate change to be made. There is, I'll just go straight to item 4 there, that the workforce planning corporate risk be archived. An unusual thing, and Ian talked us through very, very eloquently around why we might possibly archive a risk that this remains sitting in the middle of that risk matrix. All very satisfied that that is the right thing to do, and to move that into an archived risk. Essentially what we're saying is that does remain a risk that we need to be aware of, but the level of mitigation that sits within there currently is now business as usual routines, and so it wouldn't be something that would necessarily sit there. So we were all very satisfied with that, and there was robust conversation around it. The one that I would just like to ask Cabinet to linger on a moment, if we could, in this meeting, and Councillor Dennis Hardwick, I'm sorry that I've not preempted you on this. I absolutely should have done, and that is incredibly bad manners of me. But I'm hoping that this is a simple question for you to answer. If it is not, then hopefully there is a simple way for us to get around to work around this. But item 3 there, around the no change the risk score for the review of the waste corporate risks. So as we worked through that and looked at that in detail and gave that the appropriate level of scrutiny, there were just some questions that we wanted to make sure that the executive member for waste and recycling had an opportunity to input on that, and to make sure that they were aware of what was included in that risk and were comfortable with the mitigating actions that were in there. So I think the recommendation to Cabinet, if we can just have clarity on that now, if that executive member is aware, and if they are not aware, whether or not they would be able to do that in the very short-term future, so that we could be satisfied that that risk should not change. Essentially what the committee is saying is, if Liz is all right with it, so are we.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'll do then, I will move the recommendations and then ask for a seconder. That's Councillor Clark. You're on mute, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, I was also using the wrong mouse, which doesn't help. Happy to second it.
Thank you very much. Elizabeth.
Sorry, my mouse was clicking, but it wasn't registering that I was hitting the mute button. Yes, thank you, Councillor Aspinwall. I am aware of the risk matrices, and we had a discussion with waste officers prior to the reports going through to FARC. So I'm absolutely happy with the scoring that's in there. And I think there was a discussion around the new burdens doctrine as well in respect of the garden waste charging. And it's one of those things that we've considered everything and arrived at the conclusion that although naturally anything that happens in waste is going to be a little bit high impact, the probability of those risks crystallising is not sufficient to push it all the way into that top part of the risk matrix. So yeah, I was aware and I'm happy with it. Thank you very much.
Okay, I believe that answers your questions, Councillor Aspinwall. So Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, can I put the 4 recommendations to you all? If you could indicate if you're in favour by raising the blue hand or yellow hand, if as necessary. Okay, thank you all very much. That is clearly carried. Move on then, if I can click my notes down. We then go to several more referrals, which we'll take with different items. Item 7F, we would take with item 17. Item 7G, with item 18. Item 7H, that's from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the Corporate Peer Challenge Action Plan with item 12. Mouse is not working now. Let's try this one. Bear with me. This one's easier. Where have we got to? Item 7I we will be taking with item 13, and item 7J will be taking with item 15. So then we have, having got rid of all those referrals, and well, not got rid of them, we'll be dealing with them later. We move to item 8, community asset transfer, Hitchin Bridge Club. And before we consider the reports, I would like to welcome Margaret Edelston and invite her to make her presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. Good evening, officers. Chris Robson has done a very thorough report for you, and that came before the Hitchin Committee as well as Cabinet. And he also attached a lot of the documents in support of our application, which hopefully set out the value of Bridge not only to individuals but to the community and to the town and the district. Well, I only really want to mention 2 things. The first one is that ever since COVID hit last March, it's now a complete year, we have been entirely online as a Bridge Club. And during that time, we have increased our membership, we have increased our sessions from 5 to 9. And the reason for that is because when we were in the church, there were only 5 sessions available. And this picks up on what some of the councillors said earlier about the lack of community facilities within Hitchin. We couldn't expand when we were at the church. We were using the maximum we could. And we've moved now from 5 sessions to 9. And that not only demonstrates the lack of facilities that there are in the town, but the demand for the Bridge Club to continue to expand and to provide its services. But playing online, although it can still keep you mentally active and challenged, it does nothing for people who live alone, who are worried, anxious, feeling unstable, and maybe even mentally ill. Whereas getting together around a bridge table, meeting friends, shaking your hand, exchanging gossip, does an awful lot to improve people's mental health, reduce their social isolation. And can I make another point about the lack of facilities? Facilities for individual groups sometimes have to be more specialised than just moving around from community centre to community centre. And one of the things that came out of the Hitchin Committee was the need of lots of groups for those facilities, which dealt with their particular requirements. And one of the things I can tell you, which I've only just learned, is that the Hitchin Band and the Charnwood Community Management Association have got their heads together following the meeting of the Hitchin Committee. And they are now looking for a combined use of that building, which will satisfy both their needs. So that's a positive. And it's useful that councillors can work with officers and can work with the community, but they have got to recognise that different organisations and different sports, different groups need different types of accommodation. And you can't have a one-size-fits-all and say, yes, you can put the band and the squash club and the chess club and the bridge club and use everything in the same building. You can't. Sometimes people need a bit more specialist facilities, and that's what we are offering to provide. The other thing I want to mention is where we go from here. If the Cabinet is minded to agree in principle that they will transfer by lease a piece of land at Cadwell Lane, the bridge crew is then going to set about making that happen. It will produce a business plan. It will apply for planning permission. It will instruct an architect and draw up plans. We will submit a lease for the approval of the council, and we will arrange for a members' loan scheme. And all those things will happen in parallel so that we can actually make real progress. And I just hope you will feel able to support this venture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Are there any questions? And I think we've got some hands left up from the last vote. So, Judy.
Yeah, mine was a new hand as opposed to a legacy hand. And it was to ask a question, actually, because whilst I absolutely take the point that in some ways the use of Zoom has been a thing we've all had to do, and obviously there is a need for the Bridge Club to get back to some sort of normality, hopefully in new accommodation. But it's certainly been my experience, and some of my colleagues have heard me say this so often it's become, I'm sure, very boring, that there are some people that we've managed to reach out to and reach through Zoom who wouldn't have come to some of the activities that we do as councillors. There may be people who join a Bridge Club who wouldn't be able to access the real, actual Bridge Club. And I wonder whether any thought has been given to having the occasional opportunity for those people to continue to access what you do by Zoom, even when you've got an all singing, all dancing centre for people to be in, if should they so wish.
Yes. Yeah. Well, just to clarify, it's not Zoom. You actually use a designated bridge base platform in order to do this. And yes, it certainly is the intention of the Bridge Club. But even when we get back to face bridge and we have lots of sessions in-house, there will be a couple at least of online sessions, not only to get in touch with people who feel perhaps uneasy about coming out at night or can't come out at night, but also to contact people who have left the district. We've got members now who are playing with people all over the country, their sister, their brother, their former partner, their mother, and that will continue. We will not abandon that. But the only thing about playing online, it doesn't give you that personal contact. And I know you understand that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Ian Albert.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Margaret, for that presentation. I'll come later to the referral from the committee, but probably just it might be useful just if you can clarify sort of these sort of three questions, which certainly might help, I think, to the cabinet colleagues, is that to what extent, obviously in the papers, you've sort of got a shaded piece of land. To what extent are you wedded to that piece of land, or could it be that piece of land effectively for a site for the Bridge Club be actually at the other end, next to the more industrial buildings as opposed to the residential buildings? If you could also set out what you think the impact would be if Cabinet did choose to go for recommendation 2.2 in terms of asking you to take the sort of pre-planning application advice instead. And then finally, it'd be good just to understand, and I think it is really welcome what you mentioned earlier on, and Keith Hoskins had mentioned to me about the meeting that Hitchin Band had with the Charnwood Association and with Keith and other colleagues about that building, and that's really, I think, quite an exciting sort of thought as to how that might develop, but how you would see your view that's obviously in the papers about how you might be able to share that building, or let that building out to other organisations other than the Bridge Club, and how you see that working, and what would be the impact upon that, and are you happy with what's in the papers in relation to that element of sharing?
You've raised 3 points. First of all, the piece of land. We're not precious. We're quite happy to have a piece of land anywhere in Hitchin. We chose that because it would be the less obtrusive in terms of nearby residents. There are very few residential properties around. But if you've got another alternative, which is just as useful, so that's not a problem. Sharing, yeah, now you've got to understand what a bridge club actually looks like. Take a big room, a big open space, and put 24 tables and 4 times that number of chairs in it. And that's what it looks like. You don't move them around. You don't carry them and fold them up and put them in a cupboard. You don't carry them from community centre to community centre. They are there. So yes, there'll be lots of alternatives that would ideally fit that sort of setup. Any of the what I would call mind sports, Go, chess, backgammon, Scrabble, any of the board game operators and clubs would find that ideal. I think people would find it useful if they were giving lectures or if they were having talks from a representative. It might even be useful for tutoring. Because children can sit at those tables and they can have a whiteboard in front of them and they can have a lecture, or they can catch up on their maths or their English. But it wouldn't be suitable, for example, for a rehearsal room or for country dancing. You've got to actually fit your accommodation to the types of organisations that could use it. Teaching a new language would be suitable. The U3A might well use it, and the Workers' Educational Association might find that sort of layout useful. There are lots of alternative groups and communities that would find that setup to their needs. But there are lots that wouldn't as well. What was your third question, Ian?
The third question was Margaret, was about the pre-planning advice.
Oh, right.
Just before you start, I mean, just in terms of the land, if I could be absolutely clear, sort of, and for Chair, sorry, apologies, that I was more thinking that the drawing shows that your suggested site being at one end of the Cadwell Lane site. I was more thinking about as to whether you'd have a particular problem if it was at the other end of that open space, you know, which is actually by the industrial buildings, as opposed to the houses.
No problem in principle. If it's of a similar size, then there wouldn't be any particular objection. I don't know whether that would be worse perhaps for the football pitch, because there is a small area of public parking at that end. And I think the mums and dads who come to cheer on their little boys playing football on a Saturday will probably want to use that. And the building in between the two might not be quite as suitable. But that's not a problem. The pre-planning, unless the council is prepared to actually lease us a piece of land, we're not going to have any need for planning. And first of all, you've got to make a decision in principle. Will you let us have a piece of land on lease? If the answer to that is no, then we'd be wasting our time going for pre-planning or planning. And pre-planning costs extra money and extra officers' time. We're quite happy to go straight for a full planning application if you are with us tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, Margaret. You've answered very thoroughly the questions that were put to you as well. So thank you. Okay, I think we then move on to present the report, and I'll invite Keith to present.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Well, colleagues will have got comprehensive documentation, as Margaret's alluded to, that shows that Hitchin Bridge Club is a properly constituted and well-resourced community group of a couple of decades standing or more, and they are simply seeking to have their own dedicated club premises. As has been mentioned, this has been their search now for a considerable number of years, and the proposal here sort of transcends several departments. I mean, there are environment issues, planning issues, and community engagement issues. Yes, ideally it would be great to be able to provide this facility nearer the town centre, but the options have been researched very thoroughly. and we just haven't been able to come up with anywhere over all these years. And Ian's stolen my thunder a bit, because I was going to make the point as well that the siting of this unit, I believe, should be at the other end of the field next to the industrial unit rather than next to the residential, but I would imagine that's as much a planning matter. Shared facilities have been looked at. I mean, for example, when we looked at the St John's Community Centre, but it was disingenuous, I think, always to say that there was sufficient space for community groups around the town. There isn't. There is if you want a room at sort of 11:45 on a Wednesday morning, then fine. But if you want space between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. on a midweek night, you've had it, really. A lot of these halls, and they are prime time. So that's part of the problem. If this were to be turned down, then the Hitchin Bridge Club must not be left to their own devices to find a solution. And we've already talked about that under the previous Hitchin Committee recommendation, that we should be proactive now in trying to solve some of this. I mean, the previous administration had a programme of sort of demolishing pavilions to save money. I mean, the examples were at St John's, Walsworth and Cadwell. They all went, and that land which previously had a building on it is now just not derelict, but it's green space, I suppose, but it wasn't always green space. So that needs to be borne in mind as well. So I was pleased to support this at Hitchin Committee. I'm pleased to support this here as well. I think we need to give Hitchin Bridge Club, who have been long suffering looking for a home, we need to give them a firm steer so that they can go away and bring forward a business plan and a proper proposal. So I shall be recommending 2.1.
Okay, thank you very much, Keith. I think we'll take the referral from Hitchin Committee next. Before then, we take the recommendations. So if Ian, I think you're going to move the referral.
Yeah, Chair. And just to clarify that I may well want to sort of speak in the substantive debate, but here I'm speaking on behalf of Hitchin Committee. Is that agreeable? Is that okay, Chair? Does that
yeah,
that's okay?
Yeah.
So just briefly, I mean the papers in front of you. We had a very thorough discussion at the committee. I think members put a range of questions, and obviously Margaret and obviously Chris Robson provided a lot of detailed information, which was really helpful to us. I think it was very clear, obviously, and it's right to say that a number of Hitchin Committee members are also on the planning committee. So a number of people felt that they weren't able to take part or vote in the debate because of their engagement and role on the North Herts Council Planning Committee, in case this may come in front of them at some later point. So clearly there was a rather more limited number of councillors that could that actually voted on it, but it was a motion that was clearly carried to recommend to Cabinet that we did go down under recommendation 2.1. As was said here, I think there is certainly, I think we recognise that there are some significant, I think, challenges and the report sets out some of the environmental questions that were there. But we did believe on the whole that it was right to put forward to Cabinet a recommendation, as Keith has set out on recommendation 2.1, that we did go to that next stage. But I think all the committee recognised that there are still some very significant hurdles to go through here before we'd actually get to planning, and obviously even going through the planning process itself. So but our recommendation is for 2.1, and I'd just like to move that on behalf of the Hitchin Committee.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. Keith has moved recommendation 2.1. I'm happy to second that to open the debate. So it's over to councillors. Councillor Jarvis, Steve.
Thanks. I mean, clearly there's been an extensive search for locations, and as Keith Austin said, they're not in great supply. I mean, there are, as I think is set out in the report, some environmental disadvantages for this site. Although there was a building on part of it until relatively recently, the proposal, including the car park, is significantly larger than the pavilion that was there, I believe. And clearly has been acknowledged, this is not the ideal location from the point of view of accessibility. If it's used in predominantly the evening, pretty much everyone will travel to it by car. So I think we need to take that into consideration. We also need to take into consideration that the next item on the agenda is climate change strategy, that should we adopt it, commits the council to requiring high standards of energy efficiency on any land on buildings on any land it disposes of. And I assume we do agree with the climate change strategy. I think that would have to apply here. So I suppose what I'm saying is, I think if we're going to do this, we need to make sure that it is that it's a zero carbon building, that we do what we can to mitigate the loss of green space. And that's, I think, something that otherwise has some environmental disadvantages into something that is environmentally acceptable. Now, of course, there are some costs in doing that, so that's something that may need to be taken into consideration. But I think a building that is perhaps zero carbon, that combination of insulation and on-site PV generation, provides charging for electric cars and bicycles in the car park, and puts in place some suitable planting, is a lot more acceptable than a civil brick building and a tarmac car park where you can park your petrol-driven or diesel-driven car. So I think getting those details right is important in terms of producing something that's acceptable from the environmental point of view. And although the cost may be greater in terms, the capital cost may be greater, of course, some of those changes will have significant benefits for the operators in the long term. I can think of at least one hall in North Hertfordshire which generates a significant proportion of its income. Now, fortunately, it can sell energy at a feed-in tariff that's no longer available, but you know, there are some significant costs that can be saved by doing things the right way. So I think I would want to see those sorts of things built into any proposal to go ahead.
Are you suggesting an amendment to the recommendation that asks for these things to be taken into consideration?
I think probably that's the best way to do it. I think we need to be clear, both for the council and for the Bridge Club, what we're expecting to happen in this respect.
Okay, so I don't know if Hilary, you can you're some wording for us. I think we're asking it to be taken into consideration. I think it's already been said that there is a planning process to go through, and clearly that is a completely independent process, which is why a lot of people at the Hitching Committee didn't comment and also or abstain when we had a vote. So I think it's reasonable to add that caveat to ask for the environmental considerations to be taken into account. So Keith, are you happy with that as the mover of the motion? Yeah, okay, so we'll add that. That's obviously that will help with the planning process and obviously help towards our objectives. And unfortunately, of course, Margaret's had her piece now, but she obviously listened to the debate, and I'm sure that will go back to the Bridge Club when they look at the planning issues. I see no more hands, although Ian, I think you said you wanted to come in and comment during the debate. Ian.
Yeah. I mean, I will do, and I think what Steve said, I think that was very helpful actually, and I think that's probably I think it's helped to kind of crystallise some thoughts in my mind. I mean, I think as one of the my colleague Judy Billing here this evening as another Bearton Ward councillor, we're only too well aware of some of the issues that there are in Cadwell Lane at the moment, we've got significant problems with overnight lorries, the staying in that road, causing traffic jams at various times, the noise that there is from the metal scrap yards that's causing problems for residents in that area, and notwithstanding which now obviously some very large concrete blocks have appeared to stop the lorries parking overnight on the grass and actually leaving some fairly untasteful rubbish in that area. So I think actually getting the site right for this will be critical, and that's certainly something that has emerged, I think, particularly since the Hitching Committee, when we've been discussing with the county council, with the police around that area, and particularly, as I say, because of the overnight parking of lorries and regular long queues of lorries. So I think one of the questions the Bridge Club will need to think about, is how you kind of mitigate the traffic in that area, because there is certainly already problems at different times of day, and even during the daytime when you might be using it most. And so that's certainly something that you'll need to think about. But I think taking into account Steve's suggested amendment, and also stressing, I think, that this has got quite a difficult route, and certainly I've become aware of that since the Hitching Committee. I think there are some real challenges in here in actually this going through the planning process, even with some of the things that Steve has said. But nevertheless, I'm happy that I think this evening to go along with what the Hitching Committee said, which is to support recommendation 2.1, but I very much support sort of Steve's amendment, and I certainly think Margaret, the Bridge Club, need to be aware there are some significant problems for residents at the moment in Cadwell Lane, which are themselves quite difficult to resolve because of actually the siting of metal scrap yards and so on, and this becoming quite a real long run in and regular. Literally, when Val Bryant there, Councillor Val Bryant there the other day, you could, every minute there were several lorries going past.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Hilary, can you clarify?
Yes, sorry, if I can just say, I've got that this would be subject to consideration of environmental and impacts, and but who's going to assess whether the consideration is?
I think what the amendment is saying is that in progressing the application, that the Bridge Club be asked to take account of the appropriate environmental considerations. I think clearly there is a process to go through. It's a separate planning process, but I think in judging that, things like that will be of very great interest to the council and, of course, to the Bridge Club itself. And I know from previous discussions that the Bridge Club would like to do that anyway, from what I recall. Okay, so if there are no other discussions, if we're clear on the proposal, which is 2.1 with that amendment, can I ask you to indicate, first of all, if you support the recommendation, could you please show? That is very clearly carried. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, and thank you to the Bridge Club. I know that's been a very long process since Bancroft Hall disappeared. So yes, well done. Next step now. Okay, we move on then to item 9. I'll get back to my list. And indeed, that is the climate change strategy, as you so rightly said, Steve, the next item. So Steve, over to you to introduce.
Okay, so thank you very much. So this is an update to the climate change strategy. We updated it last year. Since then, we've done a lot of work in terms of assessing the council's current position and also looking at what we can do in terms of meeting the objectives we set out when we declared the climate emergency back in 2019. So we've become clearer about what our objectives should be in terms of reducing the council's own emissions to a carbon neutral position by 2030. and seeking to achieve a zero carbon district by 2040. Now that's 10 years in advance of the government's target. The motion that we passed in 2019 committed us to exceeding the government's target. We had a debate about this at the Environment panel, but this document originally said 2050. The Environment panel suggested it should say 2042. I think having looked at that subsequently, that implies a degree of precision that I think doesn't really exist, and that I think that 2040 is the target we should be aiming for. There's clearly a long way to go in terms of achieving that target, and it will involve doing things that we currently don't understand how to do. That applies to a lesser extent to the target of a carbon neutral council by 2030, but we are clearer about the challenges we face there. Over the last year, we've nearly completed an assessment of the council's carbon emissions. There are a few bits outstanding in terms of some of the transport-related emissions, but substantially we understand what the emissions are at the moment, and we also understand a significant number of ways in which we can reduce those, essentially reducing energy costs in our buildings, saving not only carbon but money. There are some substantial challenges remain. The two largest ones are how we decarbonise our refuse collection fleet. And we're clearly not going to do that by disposing of current vehicles before the end of their life, because that would have a significant carbon impact. But we do need to ensure that over the next few years, there is a robust plan put in place to ensure that their replacements are preferably zero carbon, if not. The other issue that we have to address that we don't have the solutions for at the moment is the question of the energy usage of our swimming pools, and that is a question that the industry as a whole is looking at. At the moment, they use fairly considerable amounts of gas because they are very large bodies of water kept at elevated temperatures all year round, and the technology doesn't exist to do that from heat pumps at the moment, or at least not within the sort of footprint that we have for these buildings. So there are some challenges, but there are some things we've identified where we can make some real progress in efficiencies, in some in-house generation, in building on the reduction in travel that we've all been forced to undertake over the last year or so, and looking at what we can do in terms of reducing the amount that both officers and councillors need to travel in future, whilst perhaps meeting when that's the best way of doing things. The new strategy sets out three key areas. The first is taking action, where the council can actually change its own emissions. So that's most of what I've talked about so far. The second is enabling carbon savings in the community, where the policies we put in place have an impact on the carbon emissions of the citizens of North Hertfordshire. And that clearly has a much bigger potential payback, because the council probably represents no more than 1 or 2% of the carbon emissions of the district. Most of what we can do in that area relates to our policies on planning and on transport and on waste management. And there are some steps we've identified that we can take to ensure that new developments are more sustainable. There are more we could take if the government backed up some of its carbon reduction rhetoric with an appropriate planning system that supported that better. But nevertheless, there are some significant things that we can do to reduce the carbon impact of new development. There are some more challenging issues as to how we reduce the carbon impact of the existing parts of the district, of course. And then the final of the three areas that the strategy sets out is that of inspiring the community. And this is an even bigger chunk of carbon there, which depends on people's lives which are not connected to the council at all. And doing the first two, of course, is an important part of persuading the community to do the right thing with their own emissions. To be seen, to be leading is important, but there are some specific things that we've set out. One which has been done by a few councils is to allow people to compare their own carbon emissions with those of their community and the rest of the country. and there are various tools that will enable those who are interested to do that and encourage them to take action as a result. There are proposals that we can offer awards to businesses for environmental excellence. We can encourage changes in working practices, and we can communicate what we and others are doing. I think it's worth saying that this is quite deliberately a climate change strategy, not a sustainability strategy. So it doesn't address waste minimisation, other than in respect of the way in which that supports carbon minimisation. It doesn't address biodiversity, other than in the respect that planting more plant matter provides more carbon sequestration, and it doesn't address air quality. And those are all important issues, but quite deliberately, this document focuses on the question of reducing our carbon emissions and the impact that they will have on the climate. We've got some detailed action plans, which, as I've said just now, include some objectives in terms of ensuring that when the council disposes of it, of any asset it doesn't need anymore, that it does so with condition that they will be used in environmentally sustainable ways. That's important. We need not to be seen to be washing our hands of things and claiming that we've done a great job when all we've done is outsource the issue to somewhere else. And similarly, although there are plans for offsetting by sequestering our own carbon, and we will need to do some of that, there is no part in the plan that says we're going to buy carbon credits and pay someone else to offset our emissions. So, as I said, there is a plan that sets out a series of objectives. Won't get us the whole way to where we want to be, but it was an important next steps in that. We will need to keep this under review. And then there is a section of the strategy that documents what we've achieved so far. So I think hopefully this will set out both for the council and for the district what our objectives are, how are we planning to achieve them, and how far we've got. So I hope the Cabinet will approve the strategy.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. I'll invite Elizabeth now to present the referral from the panel. Elizabeth.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Martin. So Steve's outlined the climate change strategy, which has obviously evolved from the paper that the Environment Panel heard and has taken away some of those recommendations. As Steve's touched on, one of the suggestions was that we set ourselves the date of 2042. Steve and I discussed this following the panel, and as indicated, we felt that maybe 2040 would be sort of a more solid and more clear date, and we like to set ourselves challenging targets and be brave when we look into these things. There was quite a lively discussion around the strategy, and we had a lot of conversations around things that this council has within our control and things that we can change and things that we can influence, and how we can support residents through a journey to help improve our climate. But equally, those things that are beyond our control. We just had discussions around biodiversity, and some points from that have been taken away to be looked at in future, quite justifiably so, because it's a large piece of work in a separate and distinct biodiversity strategy. There were a lot of issues as well coming up around housing and how the majority of our housing stock, not just in our towns in this district, but across the country as a whole, isn't really sustainable, and thinking about those kind of challenges. And I think sort of some of the interesting suggestions that came through from the panel were what this council can do using our platform and our ability to signpost people to where they might be able to, for example, retrofit their homes to make them more environmentally friendly and climate efficient. So I think that overall, the panel felt that the strategy was good. We want to do more. We want to find ways to further improve and go beyond what this council actually has the power to do. And it's incredibly frustrating to us and to the local community groups that we've been working with over the last 2 years that we can't, and that our hands are tied in some places by, for example, planning frameworks and national governments, but we're satisfied that the strategy is going to deliver results. It's going to be challenging. I know, for example, some of the things that are in the climate strategy around transportation and climate and carbon emissions for waste are going to be tough to hit. But I think that we're quite happy with it, and the panel would recommend that Cabinet adopt and support the climate strategy that's been put forward, and bear in mind that it needs to be a living document. It's going to continually evolve to meet the needs of our planet as we go forward. And it's the duty of not just those of us in this room, but each and every member of the council, all of the officers as well, to use what influence we have to try and support residents and bring them along on this journey with us, because it's not about one individual, it's about everybody playing their own small part.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I think it does show the value of the panel that there was that full discussion. And although I believe you're not following their recommendation of 2042, but you'd prefer to stick to the original, I think that the fact that there was that full discussion, I think, is extremely valuable to us. So I take it, Steve, you are moving the recommendations as in the original report.
I am.
And Elizabeth, are you seconding? Yeah,
Yes,
that's
I'll
a yes.
second it,
So
Chair.
it's
Thank
open
you.
to any further discussion. Did I see a hand up, Paul? Paul.
Unmute myself. I just wanted to ask whether, because some people suggest that chucking money at it, this type of thing will solve the problem. But am I right in understanding we have to work within our capacity, because our officers can only work, a certain number of hours a day, to do what we can do, and we are doing as much as is physically possible. And in fact, our officers going above and beyond.
Okay, I'll take Gary next, and then if you'd like to come back at the end, Steve. Gary.
Well, it was I put my hand up just as Paul was starting to speak there, and it's on a similar point really, because clearly the importance of us having a strategy is key, and that's fully understand. And the fact that there's been good consultation and good public involvement in that strategy is key as well. But also, just taking on the point that Paul sort of alluded to there, is that there has to be a realistic strategy that we believe is achievable in the first instance. But secondly, the public must understand that, of course, whilst we understand the eagerness to push forward with as much of this strategy as we can, there's limitations around it. And I think it's just important, and the point I wanted to make was really just around the public just have to measure their expectations somewhat about what can really be achieved by the council. But clearly, I think having a strategy is a key move forward for us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Ian Elbert.
Thanks, Chair. Really just to build on what Paul and Gary have just said, and I wanted to particularly here highlight paragraph sort of 10.1 of the report, because I think this is an ambitious strategy, but it's also a deliverable strategy, but because it recognises, and I think that's the importance of paragraph 10.1. I know I would say that, would I, as the finance lead for the council, but this is a recognition that we would, in many instances, like to do more, but we also recognise that that we have to take account, unfortunately, of the financial situation we and all local authorities are faced with by a lack of sufficient government funding for actually a lot of the important work we do. So actually, the real importance there are actually setting out very clearly that where we need to spend some more, we will need to look for savings and efficiencies. But what we do actually believe is that what's actually in the plan here, that we will need to carefully prioritise, but we can actually deliver this plan in its way within our financial constraints that face us. But there are challenges, and I think 10.1 sets that out. And I think we're both being ambitious, but being at the same time realistic and prudent in what we are able to do and actually able to achieve in the coming year. So I really support this plan. I think it's an excellent document, and I hope Cabinet will fully endorse it.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I think there's no more hands, so go back to Steve to any comments you want to make.
I mean, it's undoubtedly the case that dealing with the climate emergency is challenging. And some of the challenges, some of the biggest challenges are things that are well beyond the council's ability to influence. However, there's some areas where we can make some significant progress. There are some where we can make significant progress and save money as well as carbon, which can hopefully fund some of those which do require some investment. As I indicated, there are some things where solutions are not yet available off the shelf. And where I'm confident they will be in time to meet our 2030 objective, but they're not at the moment. And clearly it's not possible to determine exactly what the cost of those will be, because some of them don't exist yet. And therefore to figure out how the council is going to pay for those. So there are going to be ongoing challenges. This is not a complete solution. We understand where we are, we understand where we want to be, and we're setting off in the right direction, but there are some challenges we need to address along the way. There are some of our citizens, some of whom have come to some of the environment panel meetings, who would like us to go a great deal faster and would like us to do some things which are not within the council's power to do. And I think what we've had to do is set out a strategy that is clear about what our objectives are, is clear about what the council can achieve, both in terms of its own emissions and in terms of providing leadership to the community, and what the limitations are and what the council can't do. And there will be other groups who can do things that we can't, and that will all contribute towards achieving the objective. So I think we've got a plan that is realistic, that will need to evolve, but actually take some fairly significant steps. I spent some time earlier this week talking to someone who has expertise in this area and has worked with other organisations, describing what we were doing, who expressed the view that what we were doing was amongst the best that he had heard. So I don't think we should be under any illusion that it's tough and there's more to do, but we also shouldn't be under any illusion that what we're doing here is good stuff and we're making some really significant steps. And perhaps the thing that we need to do more of is to make sure that we tell people about what we're doing, because the inspiring part of the strategy is really the bit that has the biggest dividends in the long term.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. If we can then, and I will read the recommendations before we move to the vote. As you say, that it should be absolutely clear what we're doing. And the recommendations that have been moved and seconded, that the Cabinet adopt the following documents, taking into consideration the recommendation from the Cabinet Panel for the Environment to alter the target date for achieving net zero, be brought forward from 2050 to 2040. And the three documents, the climate change strategy, the proposed actions, and Appendix B, what we've achieved so far. So I'll put that to the vote. Could you indicate in the usual way, please? That is very clearly carried. Thank you very much. We then move on to item 10, strategic planning matters, and Paul to introduce.
Thank you. You have the report before you. What it does not include is information about our local plan, in that is covered in item 11 further on. So that will be covered there. You have a number of updates on various neighbours' local plans, St Albans, Central Beds, East Herts, neighbourhood plans where we have the Baldock, Bygrave and Clothall Common neighbourhood plan, which is proposed to go to referendum on the 6th of May. So they're going out. You have an update on the Hertfordshire Growth Board work. They're at 8.8. You have addendums. Addendum A is a letter from I sent to Sir Oliver Hill, the MP for North East Herts, following a meeting he had with the Housing Minister in response to our achievement or not achievement in the housing delivery test. You also have as Appendix C the reply from the Housing Minister. The reason we've got issues is because of the local plan, but that's out of our thing. Addendum B is Luton Airport. It's the stacking system and approach of aircraft towards the area. So that is our response, preferring one of the options because it takes it further away from our area and puts the approach to give some of our residents respite. So based on that, is there any questions? Sorry, I should say in 6.20, we have no answer on the local cycling and walking infrastructure, the bid that was put in. The fact that we haven't heard might mean that we haven't got it. But the very good news is that 8.22, which is the DFT Rural Mobility Allowance, we have been successful. And we have got 1.47 million to do transport work to the east of the district to tie up the rural areas, so which I think is good news and more than and warmly welcome that result. Questions?
Thank you very much, Paul. I should say that the workshop mentioned in 8.8 will take place tomorrow, which is around the reinvigorating town centres, and progress is being made very well on that. So open to any questions, and I should draw your attention to the fact there is an additional addendum report. So when we come to recommendations, there's also been a letter from the Minister to Oliver Hill that we're noting as well. Ian.
I seek your advice and sort of Councillor Clark's advice. Perhaps I wanted to ask a question because pubs are on my mind today, and about community pubs and the local plan. But I wasn't sure whether to pick that up here or in the next item on the local plan itself and modifications. I'm happy either way, but happy to seek your advice, Chair or Councillor Clark.
I think Councillor Clark's indicating he'll respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a specific two or three paragraphs that you mentioned earlier. Sorry, because I haven't got full access to my.
Yeah, shall I? Well, if I just sort of elaborate what the question is.
That's what I was saying. Can you do it under the local? Can you do it under the local plan? Because that's.
I can do it under the local plan if you want.
If you would, it's just not relevant to that. I know. Fine. So no problem. So this is just the strategic planning bits and pieces.
That's fine.
Okay, if there are no further points, if you're moving, we'll be taking our, sorry, John, we'll be taking public speakers before we get on to the local plan. So I'll be inviting you to speak before the next item. In terms of this item, we are asked to, let me just check my recommendations. I've got them in two places, so let me get them where I can read them in front of you. So the recommendations as amended in the addendum report, that the report on strategic planning matters be noted, and that correspondence in appendices A to C is noted, and appendices A to B are endorsed by Cabinet. I will second that on the assumption that you moved that, Paul. So yeah. Can we move to the vote on that item if there's no further comment? Thank you very much, everyone. That's clearly carried. We move on then to item 11. And I believe, and I'm just checking whether I
think this is where John and Roger were going to present.
Oh, that's what I thought. And I'm just checking my notes and...
Well, this is... is
I
this?
think they're speaking under the next local plan item, which is item.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, there we've got
13.
we've got a long item. No, you're quite
Yes.
correct. I've just checked my. So, Paul, to present the further main modifications, and of course, again, there's an addenda item on this.
Yes, when the report was written, it was said we hadn't received the modifications. They turned up last Wednesday. They are attached to the report. There's 70, that's 70 pages worth of them. So if you like to go through them, there are no major one. The main report sets out the background and updates Cabinet on the progress since our extraordinary full council meeting in October. Prior to the Christmas, the inspector committed to raising any substantive issues by the end of January, and that any modifications would be those he considered necessary to make the plan sound. Following the February sessions of consultation, which covered Barkway and the master planning, the inspector has closed examination hearing sessions. As per the report, further modifications do not result in any changes to key issues on principle, with the exception of BK3, which is the Barkway site, which due to educational issues, we said we would be happy to take out, but the inspector wants it to remain. Some of the main proposed changes include adjusting a housing requirement to 13,000 homes over the planned period, which is approximately 11,500 for North Herts, Own Need, and 1,500 towards Luton, reflecting evidence of housing need considered at examination. Amending figures to reflect that some larger sites, e.g. Baldock, will continue to deliver beyond 2031, which is the current planned period. Changing how certain villages are referred to avoid the impression that we will take an overly permissive approach to development. Deleting a proposed allocation for gypsy and traveller provision near Codicott. Deleting a number of allocation where schemes have begun being built, and a significantly more detailed policy on master planning, reflecting the administration's priorities relating to place leadership and the peer challenge action plan. A commitment to review the plan by the end of 2023 to see if it needs updating in whole or in part, which is something, given the process we've got to do. We come on to local plan implementation, I think is one of my other reports. There's so many reports. Local plan, this is, yeah. So there. So I'll stop there and ask for any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. Looking for, there's no hands up at that point. If you, right, I will second the recommendations, and Steve.
Yeah, just a question. I mean, I haven't read all 70 pages in detail, I confess, but I've read them all a bit. And my recollection is there is a reflection that the future of retail is not as clear as it was, and the suggestion that parts of the plan depend upon an assessment of an updated assessment of need. What's the process? Firstly, have I understood that correctly? What's the process by which that happens? Because I think clearly, although our town centres will recover, they're unlikely to recover back to what they were before. They will evolve in different ways, and we need not to have a plan that's delivering what was needed, what was thought to be needed 10 years ago in that respect.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Where that's covered is in the item 13, which is the local plan implementation, because
okay.
the SPDs are covered. Sorry, it is, you know, it's all over the place because there's a lot of areas to cover, and part of, you know, it's my fault for so many pages in the agenda when you add it all together. So we're covering, you know, because the SPDs, when they were first drawn up, we have one set of rules, but because of the time that it's taken, the rules and regulations have changed, and we need to keep up with it. I did see Nigel Smith here somewhere. Nigel, is there anything that you want to add that I haven't put in?
Just to pick on Councillor Jarvis's question, if you like, as part of the implementation, we'll be looking at doing town centre strategies for the main settlements. As you say, a lot's changed since the evidence underpinning the plan went in. But as Councillor Cart's picked up, we're committed to a review of the plan by the end of 2023 to see if we need to look at its policies again, either in whole or in part. And I'd imagine retail may be one area where we would want to look again. And as I say, the strategies that we produce over the next few years will help inform that and what we might want to do with our town centres longer term.
Yeah, because in 13, there's the character assessment that we talk about, which will be different for every town, because every town is different. It has its own character and ambience, and we need that to take that account going forward.
And if I can add just that the work that we're doing at county-wide on reinvigorating town centres is very much directed at the same fact that our town centres will be very different when we come back. I mean, I think every day we hear of another chain that is closing shops, so that trend will continue, and there are things that we will be doing to make changes there. So yeah, thanks, Paul. Okay, if there are no other points there, we'll go to the updated recommendations. They are as amended in the addendum report. Is everyone clear, or would you like me to read them out? I think people are. I take that you're clear on the recommendations, so can we move to the vote on those as in the addendum report? So if you could indicate in the usual way. I've got to do that myself. Okay, that is clearly carried. So to give Paul a rest, we now for something completely different, and we move to the corporate peer challenge action plan, and that's for me to introduce first of all. And just to say on the peer challenge action plan, this is a live document. Clearly what we've done is, since the original draft, is that some timescales have been added, as is indicated in section 8 as usual. So we'll first of all, and sorry, there are two small points I need to add, and that's following the and I will mention them now. Let me take the referral from overview and scrutiny first, because it does relate to overview and scrutiny. So can I invite David to take the referral from overview and scrutiny, and then I'll mention a couple of points after that.
Good evening, and thank you, Martin. We discussed this at some length at the overview and scrutiny committee the other night, and we recognise the fact that with the current situation over the last year, that the some of the action plan has had to be modified or put on hold for a while because of the changes in circumstances. So that's fully understood. We note that there's good progress has been made regarding some of the recommendations, and of the 60 recommendations in total, I think 17 are marked as complete. There were 2 of the recommendations that were not taken forward, and they were regarding the length and timings of meetings. And thinking back to the original thing, it was look at different times of the day and have a guillotine on meetings. I think that was felt at the time, and I think still the case, that it's not really the way we want to work. We want to keep as much debate as we can possible and let everybody have their democratic say. That said, some of the items, I think it's 7 of the items on that corporate plan, that peer plan, refer to the overview and scrutiny committee. 4 of those, I believe, have now been marked as complete. The outstanding ones relate to training, task and finish programme, and a longer term view of the key issues are the main ones there. again, mainly due to the current situation and lack of resources because staff have been employed elsewhere. Some of those have been able to progress at the moment, but they're still very much in our mind, and we still discuss them at every meeting. The recommendation from overview and scrutiny to Cabinet is that the progress on the Corporate Peer Challenge Action Plan as set out in Appendix A be noted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, David. And just to clarify, there are two minor changes, particularly relating to overview and scrutiny. In terms of training, we just want to correct the wording that various training options are being explored for provision in the next civic year. And then with regard to scrutiny of external partners, number 60, that to add at the end that the committee have identified 2 partner organisations. Further work is needed to consider the format and timing. So that just clarifies where we are on those 2 items.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. The recommendations, if I can, I'm looking at 3 screens at once. Our recommendations are to note that progress on the Corporate Peer Challenge Action Plan as set out in Appendix A be noted. So I will move that, and I see Paul who's got his hand up. Paul.
My apologies, I had to sort something out in the family home, so I was off camera for a little while, so I will not be voting on this matter.
Okay, I won't look to you to second then. I'm looking for a seconder then to this item.
Happy to second, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Okay, any points, any questions? Or could we indicate your agreement to note the report, note the progress? Thank you very much. That is clearly carried. So it's back to you, I think, Paul, and we're on to item 13. Where are we? I thought so. Item 13. And now, before we consider this report, I would like to give the opportunity to 2 of our guests, John Webb and Roger Lovegrove, to make their presentation. So who's going to go first? Is it John?
I'll step in with the point at which I raised my hand previously, so it'll fit well here. It was for item 10, paragraph 816. We're pleased and impressed that the Council has stepped forward strategically to express an interest to the MHCLG for testing the National Model Design Code, using the proposed new developments around Knebworth as a case study. Even if there are some overheads involved, this should give the Council a forward-looking basis for subsequent development. And then over to Roger.
Okay, thank you, John. Roger.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing Transition Town Letchworth to have an opportunity to have a say about these SPDs. We keenly welcome the proposal to write these supplementary planning documents, or SPDs. TTL's experience engaging in the local plan over the last couple of years, responding to part-hour consultations and facilitating a support group for those trying to improve the energy efficiency of their homes, means that TTL has built up a knowledge base on building standards pertinent to energy efficiency. We have used this knowledge to produce Transition Town Letchworth's Building Regulation Expectations document. And I believe a couple of you should have received this recently via email. It has 8 pages and it's all good stuff. I recommend you all read it. In a single table, in table 1, we have compared 5 different things: the Building Regulation 2013 standards, those planned for implementation in 2021, those proposed by the government for 2025, the BREEE passive house numbers, and the LETI numbers. For those of you not familiar with those organisations, they're all referenced in the document. Doing this has provided a clear picture of where building standards need to be tightened to deliver zero carbon dwellings. So we believe that the council can confidently show climate repair leadership by asking for higher building standards in the local SPDs, which national standards will eventually catch up with. As a result of all that, we would like to request to participate in your SPD planning process in whatever way you could accommodate us. Perhaps a presentation to your SPD team. Also, we would need to be involved at the planning stage, not merely asked to comment on final drafts, which can be a problem. We request this on recognition of the National Planning Policy Framework document, in which para 19 includes the words design policies should be developed with local communities so they reflect local aspirations. And incidentally, there are not only 15 building expectations in our document, but also 12 separate site layout expectations. We understand, as indeed you do, that councils now have a much freer hand in specifying standards. No longer can you say we can only build to the 2013 building regs. And there are, of course, lots of examples. The main example being the local authority playbook, of course. Consequently, you can have a very eco-friendly set of SPDs. Finally, Mr. Chairman, a last point. We do understand you are very busy completing the local plan and SPDs. However, if we are to learn from the present local plan process, we should be looking now at the local plan for 2031 to 2050. And if significant dwellings are still required, should find a solution that does not involve more greenbelt erosion, although of course a new town is probably the way forward in that direction. It may be painful to say this, but if we're going to build a new town in the period 2031 to 2050, you probably need to start planning it now. So just to sum up, Mr. Chairman, all we're requesting is that you look at this document and involve us in some way in your SPD planning process. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Roger. Much appreciated. Does anyone have any questions? And I'm conscious that one or two hands were left up from the vote, so I'm assuming they're not. Okay, can I say to both you, Roger, and to John, we very much appreciate the work of Transition Town Letchworth, and opportunities to work with you very much. Are very happy to do as much as we can. And as you know, the local plan process is very much involved with consultation at every stage, and we would want to involve you at the earliest possible stage on that. I think the other thing to say, your comment about the 2031-2050 local plan is very relevant, and that is the work of the Hertfordshire Growth Board, which is now very much a public organisation, and you can look on their website, but that is very much about looking forward to strategic planning for the sort of local plans that will come in for that period. So we are very much signed up to that, and take what you said there very much. So thank you both for your contributions, and we will certainly bear that in mind as we go forward.
Many thanks, Chairman.
Okay, so then we need to move on to Paul to introduce the next item. Over to you, Paul.
Right, just make sure I can read the papers I need to read, and as well as see whether I've muted myself. Yeah, so following the previous item on the local plan mods, it's necessary to consider how proposals in the local plan will be implemented. I'd firstly like to thank Transition Town Letchworth, John and Roger for their presentation and for their email, which I did receive and have forwarded to make sure the right people have sight of it, and we are fully committed to do it. As set out, the inspector has not made any substantial changes, and we need to ensure the council has the right guidance and processes in place to successfully deliver the significant projects that are outlined in the local plan. Wide-ranging report considering a number of issues. In particular, there has been a lot of new government guidance and advice that needs to be considered from when the local plan was first sent to the inspector in 2017. Changes to the master planning process, which we do seem to be at the forefront, but I find extremely welcoming because it is challenging, and with the environmental emergency, I believe it goes hand in glove. The planning processes are included in the plan. A procedure guide has been produced to support this. This is about process, not content at the moment. Cabinet are asked to approve this, incorporating the changes ONS made. Cabinet previously considered what supporting documents should be produced in 2017, but the approved range of documents are now considered too narrow to support the Council's placemaking and climate change ambitions. A revised programme is now proposed. An enhanced design guide, SPD, building on the work carried out to date, but to align with government guidance and provide more detail on local character, that's local to everywhere. A sustainability SPD to reflect current thinking and priorities and consider issues holistically, including transport, building, performance and green infrastructure. And the biodiversity SPDs in anticipation of the government's environmental bill setting out how net gain should be secured through new development. To support these, we will require up-to-date evidence base, including character appraisals, as I've already mentioned, of the district's key settlements and areas to inform the design guide. A green infrastructure strategy to guide what is required and how it might be delivered and managed. An ecological mapping to ensure we know what types of habitats we should be delivering through biodiversity net gain. These studies and the SPDs will require new expert consultancy support, so it is recommended that the approach is funded by existing budgets, which does mean that for the moment, something like the community infrastructure levy is put in abeyance and we come back to it later. The government is talking in its white paper about doing a national SIL scheme. So we need to wait and see what happens. But normally in local government speak, that means it's in the long grass and way down the road. If I'm around, I do not intend to let that happen because we are getting developments that we are not contributing to the infrastructure, which we do need it to do. So I will be pursuing that and keeping on. I hope that answered Councillor Jarvis's question. And I am conscious that Councillor Albert, because there is about community pubs, wanted to raise a question, and perhaps he can remind me, because I can't find the email is buried that he sent with the bits in, so he could remind me of the passages that he was referring to in his question, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. Before we go on to anything else, we've got a referral from overview and scrutiny, and I would just say, given the time, it's now getting on for 9:10. I propose to take this item and then have a 5-minute comfort break. So we'll continue this item. David, reference from overview and scrutiny.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, the recommendations from overview and scrutiny are around 3 particular areas, which relate to the design SPD. In particular, is that it was felt, on the master, I'll do the master planning one first, because that's up first on my list, actually. On the master planning, it was felt there was not enough reference given to the design SPD as in specifics, or to the fact of neighbourhood planning. Although it's implied in there, they weren't specifically mentioned. So there's a recommendation there that we look at the master planning guidance and include specific references to the design SPD and to the neighbourhood plannings. And that was discussed at the meeting, and I think Councillor Clark was quite happy with the proposals from that. This actually goes back a lot further than you mentioned, Chair. You mentioned earlier that July 2017 was when we submitted the local plan for examination. 3.5 years ago, getting on for 4 by the time I hear any more of it. If anything good has come of that delay, it is getting that master planning process that we had in the original submission version there, but it's now fleshed that out a little bit, so that's quite good. The other thing that we looked at the time on that the thing was developer contributions, i.e. SIL. At that time, we were awaiting further guidance from government and looking at revisions to SIL and looking at a possible national SIL. 3 and a bit years later, we're still in the same position. So I think the recommendation not to proceed at the moment, but to keep it in mind is still valid. That said, Chairman, I think the main issue, the recommendations are to Cabinet that the master planning guidance Appendix A be approved and recognised as a material consideration and determination of relevant plan applications, with the addendum that paragraph 3.2 be amended to include references to neighbourhood planning groups and the designs SPD. So we're very specific about that the master plans must take those into account. Recommendation 2 is that officers be authorised to commence revised on an updated programme of supplementary planning documents and supporting evidence. And to support the recommendations in 2.2, Cabinet resolve not to pursue the preparation for community infrastructure levy at this moment. And 4, that member working groups be arranged to discuss the design and sustainability SPDs prior to consideration of these by Cabinet. The point was raised at Overview and Scrutiny Committee Chair that there should be some particular emphasis on the environmental impact and the sustainability of new homes, and also that we look at being quite specific about homes for life. As well in that, so that it was a request that that prior to the SPDs coming before Cabinet, that we have a working group on those, Chair, and that's recommendations, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I think you indicated that you supported the amendments from Overview and Scrutiny, Paul. Yes. So if you're moving the recommendations with those amendments, I'll happily second that and open it for debate.
I just wanted to say, because it links into the presentation we have from John and Roger, we are, talking there about passive and BREEAM standard housing and looking it in, and it's not just members. David and Sam Collins did a lot of good work on the previous SPD that we have that we're not taking forward on, trying to expand it and bring environmental measures to the fore, and I'm grateful for that. That work has not been lost. That work will be taken forward, but to expand it further and with the knowledge. And if people like Transition Town Letchworth and any other interested, we should bring them in. Could I just check with Nigel Smith, because I know he's hiding behind one of those black boxes in front of me. Is there anything I've missed that needs to be added, Nigel?
Not at this stage, no, but obviously if any questions come up, then we can chip in and help if needed.
Okay, I've got several hands up that I think may have been left from the vote. So I know, Ian, you wanted to come in on this.
Yes, if I could, Chair. I've actually got two questions. I will mention it when I come to one of my reports later on, but I'm pleased to report that Councillor Hoskins and I launched a new grant to support pubs opening post the lockdown next month from our additional restrictions grant money, and there's grants of £1,200 are available to pubs, restaurants, cafes with appropriate outdoor areas. But clearly, actually, pubs are the lifeblood of our community. And what I am aware of, and as you look around the Facebook pages today and so on, that there are a number of potential and putative sort of community pub groups around the district, in Reed, in Kimpton, the one at the Windmill at Charlton, and indeed, sadly, we may yet find some others. So my first question is around the local plan implementation. And in the local plan implementation, and there's some paragraphs 14.21 to 14.23, which discuss about how we as a council actually engage with local groups that approach us about potential compulsory purchase orders over a pub acquisitions. The 14.21 is the obviously talks about the legislation about opportunities for local communities to take control of their assets. 40.22 talks about the council's compulsory purchase powers and how we, but equally how we recognise that the council's preferred approach remains proactive negotiation with and advising landowners, developers, and so on. And of course, finally, it also then talks about where local community does consider that there might be an option for the council to be involved in some way with negotiation or compulsory purchase, they should contact the council for further advice on the appropriate procedure and any financial implications. And I guess my question really is how is the council planning to carry out those paragraphs in the plan, and whether we can, I think, make it rather clearer, and I don't know whether it sits with sort of Nigel or Ian Cooper in his role as a sort of doing the assets of community value, about how we actually set out very clearly what is the process for community pubs and residents that are interested in engaging on possibly setting up a community pub to approach us as a council, and what we might do to support them and advice we might provide about potential negotiations and compulsory purchase orders in the final analysis. I have another question, but I don't know whether
you deal with them one at a time. I think that
yeah,
you're
that's
right.
fine.
Paul, do you want to come back, or perhaps Nigel?
I was going to pass it to Nigel, because it's that part of the plan, how we implement it, because it's not just community assets, because it applies to commercial properties, commercial opportunities as well. But Nigel,
yeah, in turn, I mean, in fairness, I'm going to bounce it on to Ian Cooper or Isabel, in the sense, obviously, the plan sets out those powers, but from the planning point of view, we're kind of describing the discretionary powers that are available to the council should it choose to use them. But yes, any choice to use them would rest more with Ian or Isabel. So if I could hand off to them.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. Ian Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. So when we do get approached by community groups, we do provide them with lots of information. Unfortunately, most of the information is a series of requirements that we ask of those groups, of information we need to consider before we go down a CPO route, given the very high costs involved in such a route, both in terms of, we still have to pay a fair acquisition price, 24 CPO plus compensation and other things as well. So we do make that available when we receive requests, but I appreciate that looking at our website today, we don't make it very clear on the website. So I'm happy to commit that we look at those pages on the website that link into sort of the asset and community value pages to make it a lot clearer around what the process is up front. So those community groups that are looking at going down that route, they can find that straight away without having to come to us first, which then allows them sort of more time before they come to us to think about what they need to be doing. We'll also look at what, I suppose, helpful information we provide as well. So as well as kind of a list of questions, it's any hints and tips we can provide on top of that. So I'm happy to look at that if that would help them answer the question being asked.
Yes, thank you. I think that's back to you, Ian. You're
yeah. I mean, that's really helpful. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Paul, Ian, Nigel, for that. That would be, I think, would be really helpful, and I think it's certainly something I think. Whoever is the administration or who's ever on the council after May, I think community pubs is something that we will certainly need to be looking at and considering. So I think setting out the process will be really helpful. The second one, I'm not sure whether it's him, Ian Fulsey, yeah, but I think he's probably with us, but it may be a question for Ian Cooper as well, which is on the, that I did raise with Mr. Fulstone, which is around the budget allocation and that's set out in recommendation 2.3. I mean, I think it's really important that we as a cabinet, we are, and especially in a coming year where finance is a big issue, that we do need to make sure that we actually challenge and scrutinise where we are proposing reallocations of this kind. And I guess my question really there is that we're proposing to reallocate £167,000. Do we really need to reallocate that much? And can we actually find some savings from that? And do we really need as much consultancy as that? And I think it would be, indeed, what could we do with less than the 167,000? Very important that we actually look at these kind of things and actually sort of consider that financial implication of this very clearly as to what the alternatives might be. So I don't know whether either sort of Mr. Fulstone and Mr. Cooper have got any responses for that aspect. I know you may not have had time to do that, but I know you were hoping to try and get something together for us.
Right, I see.
Could I ask Mr. Fulstone to actually answer that?
I see ENF is lit up now. So
I mean, we did go through a rigorous challenge process, and we're trying to do work within existing budgets. So, but Ian, do you want to answer? You're not coming through, Ian.
Unfortunately, although you've unmuted, you are. I don't know if you can turn up your volume. We can't hear you at the moment.
You may need to log off and back in again. Sometimes solves it. You're still silent, Ian.
I think we may need to take that, as I was thinking about taking a break sometime at this point. I think in order to ENF to come back on, should we take a comfort break at this point?
Can I just see
if we come back?
Martin, can I just seek clarification on one point? The signposting, the work that Ian Cooper has undertaken to do, would that be on 2.3? Would that be an additional item as C? To improve the signposting, for community assets within there. So
that's within your If as seconder, I'm happy if you're moving that to an additional little C, then I think that's very appropriate to.
It just gets it on the books.
Okay. Well, we'll take a break now. It's if we come back at well, it's 22 minutes past 9. If you come back at 9:30, is that okay with everyone?
And maybe slightly longer, in which case I will simply have not to vote when I come back.
Right. Well, it'll take time to.
I can't help it. Sorry.
That's all right.
If everyone could turn off their cameras and their microphones whilst we're on a break, thank you very much.
Hillary.
Yes.
I'm going to try logging in and logging out again and see if I can get Citrix back up and running properly.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Hillary, can you just confirm whether or not my voice can be heard?
I can now hear you. Thank you, Ian. When we reconvene, Chair, I will do a quick roll call.
Of course, thank you.
Martin, it's Kate here. Have you managed to look at your messenger? I just asked you and Ian a question on there. I wonder if you might just take a second for you.
Okay, thanks. I think members are returning now, so we can go back on. Thank you very much. So I think members have now returned, so I'll ask ask Hilary to do a roll call.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just quickly run through your surnames, if you don't mind, councillors. Councillor Albert?
Yep.
Billing?
Yep.
Clark?
Yeah.
Dennis Harburg?
Yeah.
Rindle?
Yeah.
Hoskins?
Yeah.
Jarvis?
Yes.
Steers Hanscom?
Yes.
Mantle?
Yes.
Brown?
Here.
Levitt?
Yeah.
Aspinwall?
Aspinwall, Kate has indicated she's left the meeting now.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Officers Anthony Roche?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Ian Cooper?
Yes, here.
Vaughan Watson?
Here.
Steve Crowley?
Yes, here.
Isabel Alajules?
Present.
Chris Robson? I think he might have left. Nigel Smith?
Present.
Louise Symes?
Present.
Chloe Gray?
Present.
Ian Fullstone?
Present.
And we have Matthew Hepburn on IT and myself. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Hilary. And we're on questions on item 13. And I think Ian Fullstone, you were ready to answer the question when we had some technical issues.
Thank you. Yes, my apologies for earlier, Chair. Officers, together with the executive member, have assessed what we believe will be a high-level cost for the consultants for the 3 SPDs that we are proposing, circa about 150,000. Now, the evidence base is key. Whilst the officers will be writing the SPD, it's the evidence that underpins it that's key. That will be what will be challenged when we use these to, should we say, perhaps push developers beyond where they'd like to be with their applications to us. So the evidence base needs to be robust. And I think 150,000 from our previous kind of use of consultants is what we believe will be a high level approach. Yes, that does leave 17,000 on it, but as Councillor Clark says, if the government doesn't come forward with its SIL approach shortly, he will be expecting us to kind of move forward with the SIL, and that gives us a little bit of a fighting pot, hopefully, to start that work off. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so I think Ian Albert, you've had your questions answered.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with that response. But I think probably my message back, obviously, is that something I would like us to keep a kind of close scrutiny on in terms of as to whether there is any mileage in reducing our consultancy spend on that, but recognise the importance of doing the work. So yeah, support the recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we've had the recommendations, and as amended by the reference from overview and scrutiny. Can we move to the vote on those, please? Paul, did you want to say something? You're on mute.
Yeah, and the addition of item C on 2.3 about the signposting.
Yes, indeed. That's with the additional amendment. Okay, thank you. Yeah. That is clearly carried. Thank you very much. We go to item 14, and I believe that's Steve to introduce.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is an update on where we are on the leisure recovery, and in particular in relation to the open air pools. So we are continuing to monitor the position on the financial position on the leisure centres. Clearly, they remain closed at the moment, although we now know when they are opening, which I think is the 12th, I believe. So we have a definite opening date unless it gets changed. I think it's, although clearly we don't have the final cost for this financial year, I think it is clear that they are likely to come in at less than the amount that the council authorised as the maximum. So we're going to do a bit better than we expected from that point of view, for a variety of reasons. And partly, I mean, one of the issues is that we were successful in the application for the, and I forget the exact name of the grant scheme, but the one of the government grant schemes that we applied for, whose application results were not known at the time the council made it. We now know we were successful in, and that has contributed towards a reduction in costs, but a number of other costs are coming lower than we anticipated. So one can never be entirely happy in this position, but I think actually we're doing okay. We're going to do better than we expected in terms of the amount that this costs. In terms of planning going forward, we plan to open the open air pools on the last weekend in May. We considered the possibility of opening them at the beginning of May, but there are a number of issues with doing that. At the time the decision would have been made, it wouldn't have been clear whether or not they could open. And in particular, it's not clear the extent to which people would have been allowed to use them. And in fact, there will almost certainly still be some restrictions in the number of people who can use them when they're opening at the end of May. And that obviously limits their usefulness. It also has a significant impact on their costs. The open air pools cover their costs and more on a sunny day when they're full. On a cold, wet day when they're empty, running them is a considerable cost burden for the benefit of very few people. The difficulty is, of course, it's difficult to tell in the English summer which we then have most of those of. So the performance of the open air pools varies from year to year, and the projections we've done are based on an average summer, and we probably never have an average summer. We have also looked at the possibility of extending the end of the season, and that avoids, or at least we hope that avoids, the risks about not knowing what the COVID position will be and whether or not there are social distancing requirements. It'll also enable us to have seen the extent to which the open air pools the use of them has picked up this year. There are a lot of people who have become very interested in open air swimming and are very keen to go swimming in the open air. What we're not clear about is what that will turn into in terms of actual usage. And we will have a better idea of that. And we'll also have a better idea of the council's financial position and other issues. So the recommendation is that we should keep open the possibility of extending the opening period of the open air pools this year. Since the report was written, we've also looked into whether or not it's possible to extend the opening hours during the season that they are open. There are some constraints on that because some of them have used by clubs and for other purposes on some evenings. But it does appear that it would be feasible to extend the opening of both the open air pools by 2 hours on one evening a week, and we do it on a different evening in Hitchin and Letchworth. So people who wanted to swim in the evening twice a week could go one evening Hitchin and one to Letchworth. And the cost of doing that is estimated to be £6,500, and I would like us to go ahead. I think technically we can delegate that to the service director place, but it's something that I would like to happen. I think it would be demonstrate our support for people who want to use these facilities. It would be an interesting experiment to see what sort of level of use we get, and to try and see whether or not we can encourage more widespread use of the open air pools at a cost which is, I think, really quite small. So I'd like to suggest that we add back to the second recommendation that Cabinet delegates the decision for the service director place to decide whether or not to open the pools for an additional period in the evening, but recommends that you should do so if that is feasible.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. So that's an addition to 2.2 that we provide the finance to the open the two open air pools for an additional 2 hours, one evening a week. And that's, as in 2.2, that decision as to the feasibility is delegated to the service director place in consultation with the appropriate executive member.
I should have said
executive
actually,
members. I think that's two of you, isn't it? That's yourself.
I should have said that the proposal is to do it for a period of 2 months. There's no point doing it in September when it's dark in the evening.
Okay, well, I'm sure that we can clarify that with Hilary to make sure we get the right wording on that, but we're clear what the intent is. So you've proposed that. Ian, were you wanting to second that as the?
Yes, if I could, Chair.
Okay, over to you.
And just briefly to say, support the recommendations and that addition that that Steve Jarvis has proposed in terms of the opening hours and so on. I think it's I would certainly like to thank officers and Stevenage Leisure for I think both the kind of I think the critical nature of the challenge, the openness and transparency from Stevenage Leisure about actually how we're managing the finances of this and meeting the concerns of council, to making sure that we're on top of this and actually fully understand where the spend is and how it's going and reporting back on a regular basis. I think that's really welcome. But I think also probably just to say we've certainly had, and I'm sure a number of councillors here have had approaches from people who would like to see the open air pools open all year round and for ice swimming and so on. I think what we're trying to do here, and I think this is why I support Councillor Jarvis's proposal, is we are literally just dipping our toe into the slightly cold water of the outdoor pools to actually look at those extended hours to see how that goes, but obviously recognising there is an additional financial cost that we have to be cautious and prudent about. But that does seem to me is I think a good balance to look at what the demand is, look at seeing what actually people and residents are asking us about and trying to meet at least some of that need, and we can keep those things under review for future years, and depending on what the level of interest and obviously managing our.
Oh dear, you've frozen, Ian. While you're unfreezing, hopefully, I'll go over to Paul.
Thank you. I fully support what's being proposed. Don't have a problem with that. The only thing, the overflow car park for the swimming centre in Hitchin is the multi-storey. And at the back of my mind, we've got closing hours, so it would need to, would we need to look at that being open to facilitate it, or would there not be sufficient demand? We've got the overflow with the football club, but if the football club have got a game on, albeit coming out of COVID, we just need to be mindful that we do direct people to the multi-storey, and if it's closed, it's not going to be sensible. We need to take that into account.
Okay, I'll let Steve come back on that. It's good to see you unfrozen, Ian. So I think you are still with us, but yeah. Okay.
So just to come back on that, I mean, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I would be very pleased if we had so many people there in the evening that we had an overflow car parking issue, but that's clearly something that we need to think about. I think the only other thing I was going to say, coming on to the point that Ian Albert raised, is that we are in discussion with some groups who are interested in year-round open-air swimming, and we are in discussion with them about ways in which, whether or not it would be possible to happen in a way that would not cost the council any more money. I'm not clear whether or not there is sufficient demand for that to be the case, but I'm very happy to talk to people and explore whether or not that's possible.
Okay, I think that's all the discussion on that item. So if we can, you have the recommendations as amended. So can I put them to you? Could you indicate if you're in favour?
Chair, I won't vote. I missed Councillor Clark's contribution, so
yeah. Okay, that's understood. And yeah, in any case, that is clearly carried. Okay, we move on then to item 15, which is one that I'm going to be introducing. It's the role of Cabinet to set the performance management measures each year. You have in front of you the reports. There are clearly a number that have been amended in order to take account of what's happened with the lockdown and with COVID and so on. It's then, once we've agreed the measures, it's for overview and scrutiny to monitor them. There was a discussion at overview and scrutiny, so I'll invite David if you have any comments to make and the referral from overview and scrutiny.
Thank you, Martin. We noted that there were no new or deleted performance indicators for 2021-22. 3 had been amended, which, as you say, were related to the COVID thing. Council tax and non-domestic rates have been temporarily adjusted down for the new year due to customers and businesses being given extended instalments. So the recovery rate obviously won't be as high. Gas and electricity targets have been revised 90% of the target because of savings measures taken into account, some of which included, of course, people working from home more and less areas of the council buildings being used. And the third one was what we've just been discussing, really. The number of visits to leisure centres have been adjusted in line with the recovery plan, as the leisure centres have been closed twice now for substantial length of time. And these figures that were actually based on the leisure centres reopening in April, as they now are. So they were current figures to take into account. So the recommendation is that we formally approve those targets and be monitored through 2021-22. No other measures were changed. However, I'd just like to add, as a matter of interest, probably for Cabinet and others, is that during a previous item, although it's not recommended as a formal monitoring performance indicator, we had a separate report on public participation in meetings, which was an occasional measure. And I think it's actually worth reporting to Cabinet here that this came about because of the changes to virtual meetings and Zoom and that. And a quick summary was in the period 16th of April 2019 to 17th of March 2020, before we hit lockdown, attendance by the public at council meetings was a total of 666. I don't know if there's any significance in that particular number, but that was the public participation. In the 9 months from 17th of April to the 26th of January, since we went out to virtual meetings, there were over 800 live views on YouTube, which is the same as public participation. And we're taking into account the views afterwards. It's over 3,000 at the last count. So the public participation has increased hugely due to virtual meetings and online stuff. And I think just to point out that participation in person, 47 was the maximum number, and under the live ones at the new one, it was 110. So it's a significant increase in public participation. Although it's not proposed as a formal continuing thing, it's probably a good one to bear in mind and to keep an eye on, and to do as an occasional review, which we think we're going to do through overview and scrutiny, and probably pass on the results to Cabinet Chair. Thank you.
Well, thank you, David. That's a really interesting report, and thank you very much for bringing that to us. And maybe that's something that either through Cabinet or through ONS that we can make a regular thing. So yes, very, very interesting. Thank you very much. So the recommendation is to approve the PIs, which is identical to the recommendation from ONS. So I will move that and look for a seconder.
Happy to second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And if we can go to the vote. That is clearly carried. Thank you very much. So we then move on to item 16, which is the proposed increase in car parking tariffs. And Paul, it's over to you.
Right, it's right. Apologies, I'm having to work different devices to get at the paperwork, and batteries are running low. So, but I'm there. So we did not raise car parking charges last year because of COVID and the downturn in the uptake of parking spaces. So it seemed a lot of work for very low returns. The question was, do we increase them this year? We have a duty as a council to make sure that the parking service breaks even at least. So therefore costs have clearly gone up in the past 2 years, and that is what these increases are there to reflect. The 4% has been consulted on across the district, all the area committees. I know the Royston area committee are meeting tomorrow night, and will have their say, which is slightly behind, but I think a number of the town council have commented. We've had various emails, some in support, some saying no. We have managed to hold the 1 hour parking. So the 1 hour parking charge has remained stable for, I think that's about the 3rd year. So people doing a quick visit to the town. We do build on in the addendum report that you've got about looking at alternative methods of paying, not just paying, once and putting a sticker on your hand. I mean, it does get at the right piece of the report. It does concentrate on 2.6 on multi-storey car parks. But a number of people have said to me that surely, with places like stations who do surface different methods of payment, and even supermarkets, when you're going in and coming out, have ways of doing it. I know penalty charge notices were a concern, but if people drive out, you're going to catch them going in. If they go out without paying, you can still catch them then, but perhaps that's not something, so that could still balance itself out, because it's where do you do it? Do you want to put cars in the multi-storey at Lairridge, or do you want to do them, more relaxed at staying at somewhere like St Mary's? So there's different options, but surface car parks, that's just Hitchin. But then again, Hitchin is the main income earner for the district for its car parkings. There is some concerns that as people return from COVID and shops and community opens up again, the commercial community, there is a concern about raising parking charges. And one of the suggestions that has been put around is we delay any implementation until September to give people a chance to get back into the town, get used to the town, get through the summer holidays where children will be at home, sorry parents, but you won't have so much homeschooling to do, or the hope, unless you're playing catch up, in which case that's a different matter. That's the decision we got to make. Do we want to delay it, or do we just go ahead? I think it's May, June that it wouldn't be implemented to once we've made all the changes. The other thing is we've only put it up to the nearest 5p because a lot of people are now paying by phone. Over 50% are paying by phone. We still retain the ability to pay by other methods, and it's not just by phone. That is important to give people the flexibility. I believe Louise is somewhere on this call. Yes, down the bottom there. Louise, is there anything you need to add that I've forgotten?
No, Councillor Clark, that's absolutely fine. I think the other method of payment is the contactless method of payment, which has also increased by 50%, which is available in all of our car parks as well.
Yeah, that's the uptake, not the price increase.
No, that's the uptake.
Just in case some people are being naughty.
Okay, well, I can see, Ruth, you want to come in, but I will call you as soon as we've got a reference first that I need to take a referral from Hitchin Committee, and then I'll take you as the first question after that. So, Ian, referral from the Hitchin Committee.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Hopefully, won't get frozen this time. Yeah, I mean the report's in front of you. I just really very briefly to say that that the committee had quite a long discussion around this. That we did propose that we should go ahead with the parking charge increases. As it says in the recommendation, and Councillor Clark has covered about trying to review that balance of short, mid-term, long stay spaces. Really important, we believe. We're absolutely keen, because it's been going on for, it feels like a long time, about exploring options, and we're really keen to try and see how we can trial, the pay on exit and different ways of paying, and particularly pay on exit. We're really keen to get that trialed in a car park in Hitchin or across the district. Probably just to add two more things. One, which is that we'd also looked about implementation, and July is also a possibility, which obviously is after the government ends the restrictions of lockdown. So again, the committee did have a feeling around about that sort of delay to either July or September. And finally, and on this I'm being slightly cheeky here, but this is something the Hitchin Committee has discussed before, but it's not informally in this report, is can we, and I'm obviously looking at, obviously we've got some officers here, can we have a real go at sorting out the ability to park in Biggin Lane car park on a Friday and a Saturday after 9 o'clock, which has been going on now for the best part of 2 years, or indeed probably Councillor Hoskins will tell me it's going on about 10 years. So, but can I just be cheeky and say, Biggin Lane car park, we really need to sort that out, because we will actually get some extra money as a result of that. But it does feel doing a TRO has taken what feels a dreadful length of time. So I'm really grateful if we could. And I know Hitchin Committee would be very grateful if we could sort that out.
Okay, well, I'm sure that has been heard by the people that should hear that. I don't think it was a formal recommendation. So I think from Hitchin Committee, we've got 2 additional recommendations in their report. Paul, are you moving the recommendations in the report, and you're happy to add those 2 from Hitchin Committee?
Yeah, I just want clarification. Do we go for it now, July or September? I'd like some clarification.
So are you proposing September? Is that? Let's do that to open the debate, and I will second that with those two additional recommendations from Hitchin. Ruth.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the rationale for increasing the charges on 2 and 3 hour bands rather than on the 1 hour. My concern is that encourages people to pop in and not to stay. It means they don't stay and eat lunch, drink coffee or whatever it is, and browse. And obviously, as high streets reopen, town centres reopen more, we want to encourage people to spend time and spend money in our town centres. And so I just want to know about the rationale for that, because I personally would favour making the short term more expensive and reducing the cost proportionately for longer stays, to encourage people to stay in the town centre for longer periods. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing was about season tickets. In Royston, we have an underutilised car park that residents would make use of by buying who can't park in the town centre next to their house. They would make use of it if we could make offer a reasonable price for local residents who wanted to park there. But currently it's unaffordable, and we're now putting it up again. So I have a little bit of an issue with that. So I just wanted to ask those two questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. Paul or Louise?
I was going to ask Louise if she could, answer that one, please.
Yes, going back to first of all, the 2 hour tariff ban, that was part of the rationale that we discussed at Cabinet in March 2020, because these proposals are using the agreed figures the agreed tariffs that we put up in March, agreed by Cabinet in March 2020, and they were used as a base, and we've added on to those for this proposal going forward. So that 2 hour tariff band was what was looked at last year, and it was thought that if we could increase the 2 hour tariff band, that was the option in which that was where we had the scope to be a little bit more flexible. But the 1 hour tariff band, we've had quite a few comments from the town centre managers in that it's about having the ability for people to do a quick stop into the town centres and to move on. So we have always sort of followed that approach. Not to say that in the future we possibly can look at other forms of tariffs, and we've always said in our parking strategy that at some stage we will need to do a full review of the tariff structure. So as part of this alternative methods of payment, leading on from that, possibly we'll be looking at a full review, and that's something that we could probably look at in the next time round. In terms of the residents, that's obviously something that would need to be discussed with the executive member and also with Ian Cooper in terms of how we could actually look at that in terms of season tickets and prices, and just looking at the balance of that across it. So that would need quite a bit of more work to investigate that.
Okay, thanks. Paul, do you want to come in on that before we go on to...
On that particular point, if it's an underutilised car park, perhaps there is the ability to look at it, for parking permit prices, and isolating them, which I'm happy to. There is work and the involvement of officer time, because there is a lot of parking things, because we've just done the work on the Royston parking review, which has come back, and I understand there's a lot of objections to it, so we ain't getting far on that I haven't had a chance to read that report, but I'm quite happy to take it away and look at it with officers, whether that is something we could isolate certain spaces, if it's underutilized in that car park, which we can gather the intel for, and then say, do parking permits. It just depends on the legal costs of traffic regulation orders and the like. So I don't want to, I look at it, but, taking it forward, it would depend on, the balance, because that, similar to Biggin Lane, which me and Keith are, would seriously like sorted, I'll echo Ian in that, would bring in extra income to the council. And apart from giving the portfolio holder for finance more money, which I do have a problem with, but we can find ways of spending that as a council for the benefit of our residents.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Got Judy, then Steve, then Keith. Judy.
Thank you. I've got a question to ask, but I would like to add my weight to the debate about Biggin Lane. It's been an absurdity for more years than I can remember, and seriously stop people like me parking and doing stuff when there are no cars there. So it's a nonsense. My question though was, if we, go now or May or September or July or Christmas a year from now or whatever, does that give us any flexibility? I don't trust circumstances anymore. I used to know what a year was like, and it started with New Year and it finished at Christmas, sort of. And I knew what I'd be doing at any time, but I don't anymore, and none of us do. So was there to be a third outbreak or something ghastly that affected us all in September, would there be flexibility to revisit that decision if we made it today that we were going to put the prices up in September?
I'll take other questions and then invite Paul to come back at the end so that we can make progress. Steve next.
I know it wasn't the point I was going to make, but I think Judy makes a very good point in that we could look very silly putting the cost up in September in circumstances if circumstances turn out to be very different from those that we expect at the moment. I think that the point I was going to make, I guess we have to go ahead with something along the lines of what's proposed in September seems the best time. But for years the council has been talking about how it's going to change its parking arrangements, and we need to get on and do that because we've adopted a climate change strategy, and actually that has some impacts on the way we want people to use our town centres as well. And I'm fairly certain that actually the cost of parking is a fairly small proportion of the cost of driving your car to the town centre. The problem is you have to get out of your car and go to a machine and pay some money, and then it's very visible, and it's actually a pain to have to go and pay. And that's why people like free parking, but if you don't have to muck around paying at a machine. And I think we need to look at things like ANPR parking, where in fact people are residents in the district and just set up a parking account. They can go and park in the town centre. They then get billed for however long they stay there. If they stay a bit longer, they just pay a bit less. They pay a bit more. If they leave early, they pay a bit less. We can differentiate. People who have very large cars, we can charge more money to encourage people to have more environmentally friendly vehicles. It gives us all sorts of flexibility. Means we don't have to put charges up by the nearest 10p or nearest 5p or any of these things. And we've been talking about it for years. We actually need to get on and do it. So we're not in the position of trying to balance whether or not this will help the town centre or whether or not it will provide the necessary income on a fairly crude system that we have at the moment. And it could also solve the residents' parking issue that Ruth spoke about as well.
Okay, Keith.
Yeah, I'm going to say here to most of that, really. In all the years of doing town centre surveys, there was a huge sensitivity to the 1 hour charge. People wanted to be able to pop in and go to the bank, and not there are any banks left in a lot of towns now, but go to a bank, pick up a loaf of bread and a newspaper, and that was about it. And it irked them that they had to pay whatever it is, £1 now, £1.10, even if they only wanted to pop in for 10 or 15 minutes. You'd point out to them that it was less than half the cost of the cup of coffee that they just purchased, but that didn't seem to cut the ice with them. So Louise is very correct in that respect, that at the moment there is this, a lot of people would prefer to see no charge at all for the first half hour, so they could come in and do that for nothing. But I think it does boil down to how we charge, which is what Steve's saying. I think if people could just do a contactless as they leave or have some sort of an account, they wouldn't even notice what they're getting charged for the car parking. But the fact is, they're going to have to try and find, if they want to stay for 3 hours, £4.15 in loose change if they're buying it cash. So the sooner we can get this done and sorted, the better. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're all agreed that that we want to get these changes in, and of course it's a matter of resources to get the work done to do it. But the question that Judy raised, I think, is the one that we need to address now, and that is what flexibility have we got if, for example, there's another lockdown? And Paul, I don't know if you want to come back in on that, or we'll ask Louise to.
I will ask Louise to comment on it, or Ian will. I mean, I'm sure there may well be flexibility. The worry is that if we don't increase them, then when we come to increase them next year, it increases by more, and you're going to get a bigger outcry, which is what we don't want. You know, because it should be done small amounts every year, then people don't notice it. I do understand Steve's point, and it's the different methods of payment. So, you know, people who have got electric cars, you know, and getting smaller electric cars rather than big Jags or something, you know, so we could get more cars in, lo and behold, and create more revenue. But, yeah, we could charge, you know, a better price, you know, to commend them for driving more climate efficient vehicles. But Ian, are you set
Ian
up?
Fulstone, I think. Yeah, please.
I was just wondering, Chair, Councillor Clark, whether on 2.5 we say that Cabinet agree the proposed tariff changes as recommended in paragraphs 2.1, 2.2 above are implemented as soon as possible after the end of lockdown. And the officers in consultation with the executive member, that kind of gives us a bit of flexibility. Should we see an extension to the current restrictions?
So that I think, and maybe we need a little bit of legal advice on that, but that sounds as though something we do. I think, given the discussion, what we want to say as soon as practical after the lockdown, but not earlier than September. Because I think that from what people have said, we didn't want to bring them in before September, but obviously if there is a further lockdown at that point, then that would deal with that. I've got Ian Albert wants to come in, and then I'll come back to Paul to round up.
Just briefly, I mean, I think I've got the figure on the top of my head, but it'd be probably sensible. Could we bring in just Ian Cooper? Because I think the cabinet need just to be aware, I think, because I think I'd like to get finance in front of you all the time about what the forecast difference, and whether Ian or Louise may know this, forecast difference between a change in prices in July, let's say the 1st of July, and the forecast on the 1st of September, just what roughly that would be in monetary terms. I don't know whether Mr. Cooper can pick that up, or indeed Ian Fulstone or Louise.
I see Ian Cooper's with us. Yes, Ian.
I can try and answer that one. So it's like complicated in terms of it depends what level of demand we have, and obviously, as you'd expect, we're not sure what that will be over the first few months of this year. Certainly, the impact is far less in the first 3 months of the financial year, i.e. April, May and June. That is because there is some protection provided by the income guarantee from central government. So that means that for levels of usage up to around about 90%, the difference between applying the inflation versus not applying it is around about £5,000. The impact is greater if you have high usages because you're not protected by the guarantee anymore. When the guarantee runs out, you're looking at an impact on a quarterly basis. So for that second quarter, which I know goes slightly beyond the 1st September vote proposal that we're talking about now, of in the region of 20,000 instead, because of that lack of protection from that guarantee. So I think you're probably talking roughly, say, £25,000 in total rather than £5,000 in total. So it is, it is a decent amount of additional cost. Also, that's assuming that levels of demand are equal throughout the year. Looking at previous usage of our car parks, particularly some of the Hitchin car parks, which are the ones that generate the most income because their usage use is actually the highest in July and August. So therefore that would actually increase that differential even more.
Okay, thanks very much. Ian Elbridge, do you want to come back on that?
So this is why I think on balance, this is really hard, because I think it's just judging the usage, judging how we see the town centres and judging on income. But I would probably on balance go for the 1st of July. But I mean, you know, I recognise that it's quite a fine argument between the money, and that's something we always have to have in mind here, because, you know, of the nature of this, but equally balancing on about the usage in the town centres and obviously trying to make sure we drive usage in not literally drive, but I mean, because we prefer them to come other ways than driving, in the town centre and the use of the car park. So, but on balance, I'd probably go for July, but you know, it's a fine decision.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Paul, do you want to sum up?
Yeah, I agree with Ian. It's a fine, you know, line. I'd probably come down, you know, to try and encourage people. We need to get people back. After the first lockdown, they didn't come immediately back. It took a little while of building, because I know we were being pressed to go for free parking, you know, in the town centres. But, you know, until we had the evidence whether people were returning or not. I mean, that's, you know, whether, you know, Ian Falstone's proposal, you know, as soon as practicable, you know, would cover that rather than a fixed September date. But, you know, because Martin and me, you know, on balance, you know, we drop the other side. There is the balance, as you say, of, you know, of income. But if people aren't using the car parks, you ain't going to get the income.
Yeah.
So I come down on the other side. So sorry.
So your proposition is still to stick to as soon as possible after the lockdown, but no earlier than September. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm happy as long as you're happy with that. And you know, if people don't,
I think the discussion. I take Ian's point. I think it's a very difficult one. I think you're as the executive member, I will go with you and stick to your recommendation. It's open to anyone to move an amendment. I see that, so the proposition is that recommendations 2.1 to 2.5 with the additional recommendations from Hitching Committee, and in 2.5 we're looking at the no earlier than the 1st of September.
And you've also got 2.6 and 2.7, which is in the addendum report.
This is from the ones from Hitching Committee, yes? Yep.
Yeah.
Am I right? Yes, right, okay. I thought I'd got that right. Okay, so that is the proposition. Can I put it to the vote? You raise your hand in favour. Okay, and any, so if you'd like to take your hands down and take any against. Okay, so I take it
I'm
there's an
going to
abstention.
abstain, Chair. I support
take it there's an
recommendations,
abstention.
but
I think it's
apart
only
from the
fair
1 September.
to allow you to record an abstention, as it's been quite a, it's a difficult discussion, and I think we're trying to get the balance right between, you know, two things that are both right. Okay, thanks very much on that one. So we're then on to third quarter revenue monitoring, and I think that's that's you to propose, Ian. And we've had a note from Kate that the Fire Committee, I think, had looked at this but had no changes to the recommendations. So I'll leave you to reflect back on anything that Fire recommended.
Well, if I start with that, you've got a couple of additional sort of documents. There's the there's the FAR referral, and there's also an additional sort of table. So the FAR referral, I think the two things that I would highlight where they did make some specific comments was to actually to ask the Service Director for Resources for a new table 5 with an additional column, and you've got that as a further addendum paper in your pack, which obviously sets out the money that's expected to be covered. So slightly different way of showing the money to be expected to be covered by the income guarantee, and I think that was a helpful suggestion from FAR, and thanks to Ian Cooper and team for providing that. And they specifically wanted to thank officers for the work in administering the grants, and it's worthwhile just saying here that I echo and endorse that. So far, up until earlier on today, we have paid out just under £40 million worth of grants to businesses during the pandemic, and that's on 6,514 additional grants have been paid. I think that is a huge amount of work for a small team, and I think we can only thank Jo Dufficy and her team for that, and obviously colleagues I think will know the team members, Mark Skanes, Jerry Goodwin, and all those that sit behind them. It's a fantastic effort, and it really is appreciated. And the bit of work that Keith and I did earlier on, which obviously is starting off a new grant scheme. We've already made some payments from that new grant scheme that we started today to support pubs, restaurants, cafes with their opening. And again, I think that's another significant achievement, and I hope the cabinet members will support and appreciate that. So completely endorse what the colleagues have said on FAR. I mean, I think to try and sort of bowl through this reasonably, briefly, that the overspend movement, which is 624,000 detailed in the executive summary, looks high, especially that we've only just set the 21-22 budget, and that included a forecast as at the end of November. But this does reflect we've been running with 2 monitoring reports. The formally reported position in table 3 reflects the forecast when we have a fairly high level of confidence in the year-end position. We've also got a COVID forecast, and now that's that updated table 5, which includes areas where we're less certain. But throughout the year, we've used the amount of COVID grants applied to get the same overall position. And as the years elapsed, you'd expect the 2 forecasts have come closer together. You'll see the detail in table 3 for 2 of the main areas of movement, parking, planning. A large proportion of the movement is covered by the sales fees and charges income guarantee. Details table 6, while the forecast spend has increased, the amount of COVID-19 grant that we now feel it is prudent to apply has increased by more, and the forecast year-end position of the general fund has actually increased. However, in the same table, you'll note that the year-end general fund balance is still around £1.5 million lower than it was at the start of the year. And we're back into that same issue around government funding. Some other brief points to note: the 4 key corporate financial health indicators identified in relation to key sources of income for the council, as detailed in paragraphs 8.5 to 8.7, all red as a result of COVID, but we're keeping those clearly under close review. Paragraph 8.8 to 8.16 details the position in relation to the council's funding sources, and this shows that there's still a high amount of uncertainty, but the local tax income guarantee does provide some protection. Paragraphs 8.17 to 8.20 details the position in relation to COVID-19 grants, including the sales fees and charges guarantee. And as I mentioned earlier, FAR requested an updated table 5, which you've got. Paragraph 8.23 details in the position on business and self-isolation grants that have been paid out as at the middle of February. And as I say, I've updated that figure. The current position in total, we can provide you with a breakdown. 39.7 million is the amount of 6,514 grants. And as I say, we were absolutely delighted to announce a new grant payment today. It was launched by Keith Hoskins and myself. We really felt it was important that we continue to support the hospitality sector, like pubs and restaurants, through a difficult period when their focus will likely be on staff and stock. We're all looking forward to seeing our much loved hospitality venues come alive again. Many pubs are the social centre of their communities, and we hope that by making these grants available, they'll be ready to greet customers again and help them to do so in April. And finally, the Joint Administration is also working on the options for a new business support scheme. And again, Keith Hoskins and I had a meeting with officers the week before last, or a week ago now. This will be available to support our towns and high streets later in the year. Funding from this will come from our discretionary additional restrictions grant pot, and we'll be consulting widely on ideas for this in the coming weeks and clearly after the local election. So, Chair, I'd like to just move those recommendations in the paper in front of you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Yes, it's clearly a fantastic job that our officers have done in terms of getting those grants out, and as you say, quite right to thank them, and I'm sure that'll be passed back. Okay, so I will second the recommendations. So any discussion before we move to a vote? I see no hands, so can we indicate our support for those recommendations? Right, that is clearly carried. So thank you very much. And it's you again on item 18 on the third quarter. And my mouse won't do its job. The third quarter investment strategy.
Yeah, I'm going to read. I think really ask you just to sort of approve, conscious of time, ask you to approve this and the recommendations in the report here. I think we've highlighted the slippage of schemes as detailed in table 2 and the request to bring spend back into 2021 as detailed in recommendation 2.4. That's around the gym floor at the North Herts Leisure Centre. I think colleagues will know that where we're looking to reprogram a number of pieces of work into the future years, and we've looked at things that as you can see in table 2 around the sort of lairage, for example, museum storage and so on, where again we are looking to move those forward, and this is a lot of these things are largely sort of COVID related. So I think that's that's right to do that, but clearly we're going to need to make sure we both have got the ability, not just the funding, but the capacity to actually deliver these pieces of work, and that's certainly something we'll need to continue to review as a cabinet and as a challenge board that we've set up in there to make sure that we understand how that spending is going in 21-22. I did want to specifically draw your attention to paragraph 8.9, which is relation to the strategy brief, the strategy breach that there's set out there, and clearly obviously that we have now put some additional checking processes in place to make sure that doesn't happen again. But this has been a year specifically where we've had a lot of money coming through the accounts, but even obviously it's right to draw your attention, and it's important to draw your attention where there is a breach. But again, as I say, we have put in place measures to ensure that the limits aren't exceeded again. And finally, Chair, is really to note, and as probably all of you know from other places, that continuing to the low investment returns that which we have still continue to go down further as new investments replace the pre-COVID investments. Again, we are looking at alternative ways, prudent ways, but alternative ways for investing the money that we do have, and obviously we'll be reporting back more on that in future meetings. But clearly that's another impact, and clearly means we have less interest coming in overall, as we've reported on previous occasions. So really, just Chair, move those recommendations, and obviously particularly that where we're asking you to approve that change in 2.4 which is obviously bringing some money forward. Move those recommendations.
Okay, I will second those. I mean, it was discussed at the Fire Committee, and I believe they supported the recommendations.
They did, yes, they were happy with those.
So,
Thanks, Chair.
yeah, so I will put it to members. If there are no questions, can I have those in favour indicate, please? Thank you very much. That is clearly carried. I will then move the appropriate motion that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the following report will involve likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the said act as amended. Okay, I will move that. I'm looking for a seconder.
I'll be happy to second.
Thank you, Keith. So can I put it to you that we do that? That is carried. And then following that, you will be asked to join the breakout room, and please accept the invitation.
Matthew, if you can send those invitations to everyone, thank you. Matthew, I haven't had an invitation yet. Thank you.
Okay, so we have to go through the business of the roll call again. So thank you, Hilary.
Thank you. Sorry about this. Very quickly then, Councillor Albert,
Yes.
Billing,
Yep.
Clark,
Present.
Dennis Harburg,
Here.
Rindle,
Yo,
Hoskins,
Here.
Jarvis,
Yep.
Sears Hanscom,
Yes.
Mantle,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
officers Anthony Roche,
Yes.
Ian Cooper,
Yes.
Vaughan Watson, Isabel Allerjules, Chloe Gray,
Yes.
Ian Fullstone,
Yes.
Matthew on IT and myself. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Steve Crowley present as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. I apologise.
Okay, thank you very much, as always. And it falls to Keith to introduce the item.
Yeah, thanks. As discussed, I'd like to move the recommendation.
Okay, I'm happy to second the recommendation. Yes, I must look at the hands. There are no hands up. So can we then move to the votes? Okay, that is clearly carried. And that brings us to the end of our last cabinet meeting, we expect, of this civic year. Can I thank everyone for your contributions? It's been a bit of a marathon this evening, but we've managed to get through expeditiously, I think. Can I particularly thank our officers for all the support they've given us over this this year. We've still got another council meeting, and then we'll have some elections, and goodness knows what will befall us then. It's been the most different election, I think, that we've fought, any of us. So we'll see. But I think democracy is alive. We've been demonstrating it. So I think I want to thank everyone for all the massively hard work that you've made during this year. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks a
And
lot.
declare the meeting closed.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.